Today we will be talking about some of our nation's most powerful speeches. Delivered during our nation's toughest times, they created an everlasting impact on our country's culture. Not everybody believed in their meaning, but they still changed our country for the better.
Throughout history, the equality between African Americans and Caucasians has undoubtedly changed due to the speeches delivered by civil rights speakers dating all the way back into 1852 up until 1964. The first of these powerful speeches was delivered by Frederick Douglass in 1852.
Frederick Douglass was a free African American who spoke publicly during the Civil War era. His experience as a slave helped him win over his audiences primarily in the North. Douglass's Hypocrisy of American Freedom and What to the Slave is the 4th of July are two of his most impactful speeches given during the time period.
Frederick Douglass starts out his speech by asking questions. One of them is, are the great principles of political freedom and natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? In the Declaration of Independence it is stated, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He is implying that these rights are not being extended to African Americans. When this country was created, it was meant to be a place where everyone could be free and have the same rights. Frederick Douglass believes these rights have been taken away from African Americans and change is needed.
Douglass next compares the United States of America to the nation of Babylon. He says, and let me warn you, that it is dangerous to copy the example of a nation whose crimes, towering up to heaven, were thrown down by the breath of the Almighty, burying that nation in irrecoverable ruin. Babylon was a city-state of ancient Mesopotamia. It had many crimes that led to its eventual downfall. Douglass is foreshadowing the downfall of the United States. If the United States keeps discrimination, then the country will be unstable and collapse. This is one of his most famous lines because it shows the people what could happen to the United States because of this blasphemy. Another one of Frederick Douglass's famous speeches, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, was given the day after the 4th of July. Frederick Douglass intended to strike sympathy into the hearts of the audience in his own hometown. His objective was to describe the 4th of July to the slave owners and citizens who were not African American in terms they understood. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. It does not recognize the non-colored and the colored as a united people. Then he twisted it to show what it meant to those who were not free Americans. Douglass reaches into forbidden depths to find the cold, hard truth on what it really meant to be a slave on the 4th of July. In his speech, Douglass describes the corruption of their own court system. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery and 5 when he fails to do so. Douglass's speech was intended to bring awareness to the ironies within the principles of America.
Mary Church Terrell was one of the first African American women to earn a college degree and became known as a national activist for civil rights and suffrage. In her speech, The Progress of Colored Women, she acknowledges that the intellectual progress of colored women has been marvelous. So great has been their thirst for knowledge and so Herculean their efforts to acquire it that there are few colleges, universities, high and normal schools in the North, East, and West from which colored girls have not graduated with honor. Mary Terrell is stating that although equality has not been reached, African American women have been working hard at their studies. They have proven to be able to graduate from college with honor, which is showing that the Caucasians that they can compete with them. Colored women can be smart, studious, and beneficial.
They are slowly but surely making their way up to the heights, wherever they can be scaled. In spite of handicaps and discouragements, they are not losing heart. In a variety of ways, they are rendering valiant service to the race. Lifting as they climb, onward and upward they go struggling and striving, and hoping that the buds and blossoms of their desires may burst into glorious fruition ere long. Seeking no favors because of their color, nor charity because of their needs, they knock at the door of justice and ask for an equal chance. Ending her speech, she assures her audience that colored women are making very rapid progress and that they will one day gain their equality.
Mary Church Terrell was an African American woman who insisted that things were only getting worse in the United States when it came to the rights of specifically African Americans. In her speech, What It Means to Be Colored in Capital of the U.S., she believes that any other type of colored American citizen is treated much better than African Americans. Terrell boldly states, Indians, Chinamen, Filipinos, Japanese, and representatives of any other dark race can find hotel accommodations if they can pay for them. The colored man alone is thrust out of the hotels of the national capital like a leper.
Terrell's style is very individualistic because it is very straightforward and powerful with its words. Terrell attacks European Americans fearlessly by accusing the hospitality of D.C. For 15 years, I have resided in Washington, and while it was far from being a paradise for colored people when I first touched these shores, it has been doing its level best ever since to make conditions for us intolerable. It is the kind of rage that backs up Terrell's fearless quest for civil equality.
Later in her speech, Terrell emphasizes on the lack of humanity shown by specifically European Americans and applies it to every aspect of a person's life back then, including their living conditions, legal position, religion, occupation, and education.
In the beginning of her speech, In Union There is Strength, Mary Terrell compares the unification of colored women to the Republic of the United States. It did not take long for men to learn that by combining their strength, a greater amount of work could be accomplished with less effort in shorter time. Upon this principle of union, governments have been founded and states built. Our own republic teaches the same lesson. Force a single one of the states of the United States to stand alone, and it becomes insignificant, feeble, and prey to the rapacity of every petty power seeking to enlarge its territory and increase its wealth. But form a republic of the United States, and it becomes one of the great nations of the earth, strong in its might. Acting upon this principle of concentration and union, have the colored women of the United States banded themselves together to fulfill a mission in which they feel peculiarly adapted and especially called. We have become national because from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from Maine to the Gulf, we wish to set in motion influences that shall stop the ravages made by practices that sap our strength and preclude the possibility of advancement which under other circumstances could easily be made.
But 30 years ago, we have advanced so far in the realm of knowledge and letters as to have produced scholars and authors of repute. Though penniless as a race a short while ago, we have among us today a few men of wealth and multitudes who own their homes and make comfortable livings. We therefore challenge any other race to present a record more credible and show a progress more wonderful than that made by the ex-slaves of the United States, and that too in the face of prejudice, proscription, and persecution, against which no other people has ever had to contend in the history of the world. Terrell believes progress has been made by the colored folk in America, and they strive to become equally as powerful and knowledgeable as every other person in this country. The next speaker, W.E.B. Du Bois, is an African-American male who is most commonly known for his disagreement with Booker T. Washington. In their arguments, Du Bois thought that African Americans needed to demand equality in the workforce now, rather than work their way up. Du Bois reached for equality now instead of later.
In one of W.E.B. Du Bois' most famous speeches, Training Negroes for Social Power, Du Bois says, "The Negro problem, it has often been said, is largely a problem of ignorance, not simply of illiteracy, but a deeper ignorance of the world and its ways, of the thought and experience of men, an ignorance of self and the possibilities of human souls." Du Bois starts out his speech by criticizing the non-African world. He is saying that because of their ignorance and disbelief in African Americans, they cannot be educated and therefore cannot hold high position jobs. So, the Negro problem is all because of the ignorance of everyone else.
As Du Bois describes, the very first step toward the settlement of the Negro problem is the spread of intelligence. This is a very strong statement that comes with a lot of baggage. In order to spread intelligence, one would need a free public school system, which means adequate support of a sufficient number of Negro colleges. Along with the colleges, the growth of high schools and lower education is needed. The public school system is designed to furnish the necessary intelligence for the ordinary worker.
In Du Bois' speech, A Negro Nation Within a Nation, Du Bois declares that the great mass of Americans are, however, merely representatives of average humanity. They muddle along with their own affairs and scarcely can be expected to take seriously the affairs of strangers or of people whom they partly fear and partly despise. DuBois' speech focuses partially on the resentment of African Americans by Caucasians and also on the position of African Americans in the workforce around the time of the War and Depression. His main point is how the non-colored are afraid of what the colored people could actually do in their society. DuBois taunts them by saying that they are simply scared that an African American could do the same job as any Caucasian. Malcolm X, an American Muslim minister and human rights activist in the 1960s, once gave a speech called The Black Revolution. He questioned, how can the so-called Negroes who call themselves enlightened leaders expect the poor black sheep to integrate into a society of bloodthirsty white wolves? Malcolm X is pointing out that there are black leaders who want them to interact and learn from whites, but the poor black sheep are questioning how they will get along or collaborate with the whites who don't want them there and who are not willing to help them out. Sure, the strong, assertive leaders are doing okay, but how will the normal folk react in a racially mixed learning environment?
Since the black masses here in America are now in open revolt against the American system of segregation, will these same black masses turn toward integration, or will they turn toward complete separation? Will these awakened black masses demand integration into the white society that enslaved them, or will they demand complete separation from that cruel white society that has enslaved them? Will the exploited and oppressed black masses seek integration with their white exploiters and white oppressors? Or will these awakened black masses truly revolt and separate themselves completely from this wicked race that has enslaved us? These are simple questions asked by Malcolm X to get the African Americans to rise up to the European Americans. Malcolm X is curious if the African Americans will just comply and cave into whatever the Caucasians want, or are the African Americans strong and brave enough to demand integration? Basically, they have two choices: back down, or they will stand up to the Caucasians.
The Ballot or the Bullet is the title of a public speech by human rights activist Malcolm X. In the speech, which was delivered on April 3, 1964, at Corey Methodist Church in Cleveland, Ohio, Malcolm advised African Americans to keenly exercise their right to vote, but he cautioned that if the government continued to prevent African Americans from attaining full equality, it might be necessary for them to take up arms. It was ranked 7th in the top 100 American speeches of the 20th century by 137 leading scholars of American public address.
The proper solution, Malcolm X said, was to elevate the struggle of African Americans from one of civil rights to one of human rights. A fight for civil rights was a domestic matter, and no one from the outside world can speak out in your behalf as long as your struggle is a civil rights struggle.
Malcolm said that changing the fight for African American equality to a human rights issue changed it from a domestic problem to an international matter that could be heard by the United Nations. He contrasted civil rights, which he described as asking Uncle Sam to treat you right, to human rights, which he called your God-given rights and the rights that are recognized by all nations on this earth. He said that the people of the developing countries would be sitting there waiting to throw their weight on our side if the fight for civil rights were expanded into a human rights struggle.
Our last speaker, Martin Luther King Jr., one of our nation's most well-known civil rights activists, spoke during the civil rights movement during the 50s and 60s. His most famous speech, I Have a Dream, has one key message. All people are created equal, and although not the case in America at the time, King felt it must be the case for the future. He argued passionately and powerfully. Now is the time to make the real promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, no, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
The I Have a Dream theme. I say to you today, my friends, that in spite of the difficulties and frustrations of the moment, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day, on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a desert state sweltering with heat of injustice and oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day the state of Alabama, whose governor's lips are presently dripping with words of interposition and nullification, will be transformed into a situation where little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls and walk together as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, and rough places will be made plains, and the crooked places will be made more straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. While the address has a very strong message for white people and hints at a revolution, King's words are mostly about peace, offering a vision everyone could buy into. During the late 1960s, the fight for racial equality began to really pick up speed. At this time, racism was a growing problem that was creating uproars through hate crimes and violent protests. On April 3rd, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee, Martin Luther King Jr. gave a moving speech about the unfortunate reality of society. He was able to convey his powerful message of peace by using metaphors and different analogies that people could easily relate to. Not only did Dr. King's "I've Been to a Mountaintop" speech lead into the gradual acceptance of African Americans in what was, at the time, an all-white society, but it gave new freedoms to those who were once discriminated against.
Upon starting his speech, Dr. King immediately dives into the issues that he planned on addressing. He explains his picture-perfect America by using metaphors such as, "I would take my mental flight by Egypt, and I would watch God's children in their magnificent trek from the dark dungeons of Egypt through, or rather across the Red Sea, through the wilderness on toward the Promised Land, and in spite of its magnificence, I wouldn't stop there." Martin Luther King wants to convey that he has a strong hope for America to change their prejudicial ways. He believes that with the help of everyone in their local communities, we can all come together to obtain equality for people of all races. The speech is effective in the sense that Dr. King was able to grab the audience's attention by using everyday scenarios as well as in-depth metaphors in order to get his message across. His powerful words led to an increase of freedoms for the African American community and tolerance for all Americans. Dr. King's outstanding public speaking ability and nonviolent persona has influenced the U.S. to celebrate the differences in humanity.
Frederick Douglass's speeches that were aimed towards freeing African American slaves led to the Emancipation Proclamation brought by Abraham Lincoln.
Mary Church Terrell gave a voice to African American women when there was previously none.
W.E.B. Du Bois strived for African American equality starting in the workforce.
Malcolm X transformed the civil rights issue into a human rights issue, which brought in support from other nations wishing to see equality in America.
Lastly, due to Martin Luther King Jr.'s efforts, the Civil Rights Act of '64 was passed. This act is a landmark piece of civil rights legislation in the United States that outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin.
Due to the efforts of these amazing men and women, people of all races are able to live together as equals today.